The wind, a malevolent spirit, clawed at the small cabin in the Dakota Territory, its shriek a death rattle in the late winter of 1888. Eliza, her body heavy with the final weeks of pregnancy, felt each tremor in the log walls as if it were an assault on her own bones. Snow, already deep from previous falls, began to swirl with a blinding ferocity she had only heard tell of, an opaque curtain erasing the familiar landscape. Thomas, her Thomas, would have known what to do, his quiet strength a bulwark against such elemental fury. But Thomas was gone, claimed by the lung fever 2 months prior, leaving her utterly alone to face the maw of the storm. The biting cold seeped through the chinks in the log walls, carrying the sharp metallic scent of the blizzard, and the fragrance of their dwindling pine fire was a fragile, fading defense. Panic, cold and sharp as an icicle, threatened to overwhelm her. She pushed it down, forcing Thomas's calm, practical words to the forefront of her mind, a litany against the rising terror. "Bank the fire high, Eliza. Secure the door against the worst of it. We've seen blizzards before. But never one like this, not alone." Her movements were clumsy, her swollen belly a constant impediment, as she dragged their worn wooden table against the door, stuffing precious rags and even a spare chemise into the ever-widening cracks around the frame. The wind hammered at the door, seeking entry like a starving wolf. The snow piled against the single window, a relentless white tide, and the last of the split logs in the woodbox crackled with a dying warmth. Each pop a mournful countdown. A familiar worn leather-bound journal, her grandmother's midwifery guide, lay on the rough-hewn mantel, its presence a silent testament to a legacy of women battling the odds, a slim reed of knowledge in an overwhelming wilderness. A sudden, vice-like grip seized her low belly, stealing her breath and driving her to her knees. Then another, fiercer still. Labor. The timing was a cruel jest of fate, a bitter laugh from the storm. As if summoned by her pain, the cabin emitted a long, tortured groan. Dust and splinters rained down as a main support rafter above the hearth cracked with a sound like a rifle shot. She couldn't stay. The thought was a cold, hard certainty, banishing any illusion of safety within these failing walls. Her hand went to the small silver locket at her throat, her frozen fingers fumbling with the clasp until it sprang open, revealing the solemn, beloved face of Thomas and the tintype within. His image, usually a comfort, now fueled a desperate, almost savage resolve. This child, their child, would live. Driven by a primal instinct that transcended exhaustion and fear, Eliza layered herself in every scrap of wool she possessed, her thickest shawl, Thomas's old hunting coat that smelled faintly of him and gun oil, 2 pairs of stockings, her grandmother's journal and a small satchel containing a few essential birthing supplies, a sharp knife, and a flint and steel were her only companions, meager arms against the vastness of the elements. With a grunt of pure will, she forced the snow-burdened door outward, just enough to slip through, the wind snatching at her breath, the roof behind her emitting a final, ominous sigh of surrender. She forged into the white hell, shielding her face with one arm, instantly disoriented by the swirling chaos. She navigated by a desperate memory of a rocky outcrop Thomas had once pointed out, a faint hope in the screaming, indifferent wilderness. Each step was an agony, the wind tearing at her, snow blinding her. She stumbled, righted herself with a guttural cry, and pushed onward, a lone figure battling a landscape determined to devour her. The journey to the outcrop, barely a quarter-mile from the cabin, became an epic of endurance. The air was so thick with snow she could scarcely see her own hands. The wind's roar was a physical pressure against her ears, punctuated by the eerie whistle as it tore through the skeletal branches of unseen trees. Drifts, already waist-high in places, forced her into torturous detours, her legs burning, her back screaming in protest. She focused on each breath, each painful step, the image of her unborn child a fragile flame cupped against the gale. The lard lamp smoke and wet wool smell that clung to her clothes from the cabin were quickly overpowered by the raw, frozen scent of the blizzard. She could hear the distant, sharp crack of trees succumbing to the weight of ice and snow, an echo of her own failing shelter. The ground beneath her feet was treacherous, hidden by the swirling white, and more than once she pitched forward, saving herself only by instinct, the satchel and journal clutched tight. The promise of shelter, however meager, was the only thing that kept her from surrendering to the snow's cold embrace. The shallow overhang of rock was less a cave than a scar in the earth, barely shielding her from the wind's relentless teeth. Exhaustion was a leaden weight in Eliza's limbs, but the iron grip of labor, tightening with brutal regularity, spurred her onward. Her grandmother's journal, its pages filled with meticulous drawings and faded ink, had shown diagrams of emergency shelters, of birthing in the wild. With raw, numb fingers that barely obeyed her will, she scraped away the deepest snow, her nails tearing, fashioning a shallow hollow against the unyielding rock face. She lined it with her spare shawl, its wool already stiffening with frost, a pitifully thin barrier against the frozen earth. The icy touch of snow against her exposed skin was a constant shock. Her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged, steamy gasps, the suffocating smell of wet wool, and her own fear heavy in the confined space. As the blizzard shrieked its peak fury, a primal scream torn from the throat of the world, Eliza delivered her own child. A girl. The final push was a wave of fire and ice, a tearing agony that ripped a raw cry from her own throat. Then, a terrifying stillness. The baby was caught. A shoulder presentation. Panic, stark and overwhelming, clawed at her. No, not now, not after all this. But her grandmother's voice, calm and steady from the countless hours spent poring over the journal, echoed in her mind. Steady hands, child. Breathe. You know what to do. With a surge of desperate strength fueled by sheer terror and a mother's fierce love, she maneuvered the infant, her fingers clumsy with cold, somehow finding the right purchase, guiding the tiny shoulder. It seemed an eternity, each second a new torment, before the small body finally slipped free. The baby's first cry was a thin, fragile sound, a kitten's mew almost swallowed by the storm's deafening cacophony, yet it was the most beautiful sound Eliza had ever heard. Using the small, sharp knife from her satchel, its steel biting cold against her skin, she severed the umbilical cord, her movements efficient, honed by generations of knowledge passed down through that precious book. She even managed a clumsy attempt to tie it off with a strip of linen torn from her petticoat. She pulled the tiny, slippery body to her own, tucking the infant beneath her layers against her skin, a desperate bid for shared warmth in a world determined to freeze them both. The baby was so small, so vulnerable, her skin a terrifying mottled blue. Huddled there with her newborn daughter nestled against the fading heat of her own body, Eliza felt a strange, feverish detachment begin to creep over her. The storm's maniacal voice seemed to recede, or perhaps it was her own senses dulling, the world narrowing to the faint, warm breath against her breast. Her energy was utterly spent, a hollowed-out vessel teetering on the brink. The encroaching cold was a seductive numbness, a promise of an end to pain. She closed her eyes, her fingers instinctively brushing against the smooth, tooled leather of the journal, still tucked securely in her satchel. A silent vow to her daughter, a fragile prayer for survival formed in her fading consciousness. I will not let you die, I will not. Through the thinning veil of falling snow, just as the last vestiges of her awareness dissolved into a cold gray fog, shadowy figures on horseback materialized. They moved with an eerie silence that belied the harsh conditions, their ponies picking their way surely through the drifts. Their forms were dark against the bruised twilight sky of the abating storm, feathers in their hair dusted with snow. Cheyenne warriors, their leader, a tall man with a face like carved granite, features stern and discerning, dismounted with fluid grace. He wore a buffalo robe, its fur thick and frosted. His dark eyes, sharp as an eagle's, took in the scene in the shallow hollow, the nearly spent woman, pale as the snow itself, the impossibly small infant, the evidence of a desperate, solitary birth. His expression was grim, unreadable, betraying neither pity nor aggression. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, a moment where Eliza's heart fluttered like a trapped bird, Chief Kill's Crow issued a quiet command to his men, his voice a low rumble lost to Eliza's fading hearing. The communication was one of swift, decisive action, gestures and glances conveying urgency. The warriors moved with purpose, their movements economical and sure in the deep snow. Warmth. That was the first clear sensation that pierced the icy fog of Eliza's unconsciousness. A deep, penetrating warmth that seemed to coax life back into her frozen limbs. She lay on something soft, thick furs by their feel and faint, musky scent. And the air, though smoky, was breathable, carrying the unfamiliar, pungent aroma of burning cottonwood and strange, not unpleasant herbs. A rhythmic, distant beat, like a slow heartbeat. A camp drum, she would later learn. Pulsed in the background, a strangely soothing sound. She opened her eyes to the dim, fire-lit interior of a teepee, its conical walls painted with faint, symbolic figures. Her baby, her daughter, was nestled beside her, swaddled securely in soft, tanned deerskin, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Safe. Unbelievably, miraculously safe. An older Cheyenne woman with kind, assessing eyes and a face etched with the wisdom of many seasons sat near the small fire pit, tending a simmering pot from which the herbal scent emanated. Hawk Woman, as Eliza would later learn her name, offered a small, reassuring nod but no words, her movements economical and gentle as she checked the infant. Then offered Eliza a warm, nourishing broth in a carved wooden bowl. Eliza drank, the hot liquid a balm to her raw throat. She felt a confusing rush of emotions, profound gratitude for their rescue, a lingering terror from her ordeal, and a deep-seated apprehension of these unknown people in their alien world. Communication was a silent language of gesture and expression. A pointed finger, a questioning look, a soft hum of reassurance from Hawk Woman, a fragile bridge between two vastly different existences. A few days into their strange new life, as Eliza slowly regained some strength, a fresh crisis arose. Eliza's baby, whom she had mentally named Lily for her pale resilience, developed a raging fever. Her tiny body burned like a coal, and her cries became weak and fretful, a heartbreaking whimper. Hawk Woman, her face creased with concern, applied cool compresses of damp moss to Lily's forehead and administered sips of a bitter herbal brew from a horn spoon, chanting soft, melodic, healing songs that seemed to vibrate with the teepee's smoky air. But the fever clung stubbornly, and Lily's breaths grew shallow and rapid. Eliza saw the wary glances from other members of the camp who occasionally peered into the teepee, their faces shadowed and unreadable. She was the outsider, her child a fragile unknown. The lingering chill from the great blizzard seemed to have seeped into the very air of the camp, and suspicion, like a cold draft, followed her every tentative movement. Chief Kill's Crow himself came to the teepee once, his tall form filling the entrance. His gaze rested on the ailing infant, then on Eliza, his expression as unreadable as the smoke swirling towards the teepee's apex. The unspoken question hung heavy. Could this white woman's child bring ill fortune to a people already pressed by hardship? Desperation, sharp and cold, gnawed at Eliza. She could not lose another loved one. Then a memory surfaced, vivid and clear. A specific illustration in her grandmother's journal, a detailed drawing of a poultice for infant fevers, noted in her grandmother's spidery script as being particularly effective for newborns. It was a remedy her grandmother had learned from a traveling apothecary from the East, refined with her own extensive herbal knowledge. With fumbling gestures and a few broken Cheyenne words she'd picked up from Hawk Woman, Ashepo, hot, Mahatse, sick, pointing emphatically to Lily, she tried to convey her idea. She pulled out the journal, its leather cover smooth and familiar beneath her trembling fingers, and found the page. The drawing was clear, depicting the herbs and the precise method of preparation. Hawk Woman peered at the drawing, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. She pointed to one of the depicted herbs, then made a sign for a local root they used for drawing out heat, one that looked remarkably similar to her grandmother's sketch. A spark of understanding, of shared knowledge, flickered between them. Together, using some of Eliza's carefully hoarded dried herbs from her satchel and the root Hawk Woman provided, they prepared the poultice over the small fire, the teepee filled with a new blend of scents. Hawk Woman watched, her skepticism slowly giving way to intense interest as Eliza meticulously followed the journal's instructions. To Eliza's immense relief and Hawkwoman's visible, if understated, surprise, Lily's fever began to subside within hours of applying the warm poultice to her tiny chest. By morning, the baby was nursing weakly but steadily, her skin cool and pliant to the touch. This small victory was a turning point. A quiet respect replaced the suspicion in Hawkwoman's eyes. Whispers in the camp changed tone. She heard the phrase, Nestse Mape, Snow Woman, spoken with a new inflection, a name acknowledging not just her impossible survival, but her apparent skill. Chief Kills Crow, informed by Hawkwoman of the event and shown the journal's illustration, made a decision. Snow Woman and her child would stay. He formally assigned Hawkwoman to teach Eliza their language and customs, and significantly to also learn from her White Woman's medicine. The journal, once a private legacy, was becoming a bridge. A few days later, Kills Crow himself presented Eliza with a beautifully crafted Cheyenne baby carrier, its deerskin supple and adorned with intricate, colorful quill work in a protective pattern. It was more than a gift. It was an acknowledgement, a symbol of her daughter's and perhaps her own, tentative but respected place among his people. Spring arrived hesitantly on the plains, painting the winter-brown grasses with fragile strokes of green beneath a vast, pale sky. The air grew warmer, carrying the clean scent of damp earth and distant rain, a welcome change from the biting winds. Eliza, under Hawkwoman's patient and often amused tutelage, slowly began to unravel the complexities of the Tsehesenes Eshtotse, the Cheyenne language. Her tongue stumbled over the unfamiliar guttural sounds and nuanced tones, but her understanding grew day by day, opening small windows into their world. Little Lily, now often called Nessahiz, Little Snowflower by Hawkwoman and others, thrived in the intricate quillwork baby carrier, her dark eyes wide with curiosity at the bustling, rhythmic life of the migrating camp. But as the season turned and the last patches of snow finally yielded to the sun, a different kind of shadow fell. Word came from a neighboring Cheyenne band, carried by weary travelers on lathered ponies, of the local Indian agent, a man named Marcus Thorne. He was, they said, being unusually cruel this spring, withholding treaty-promised rations of flour, sugar, and bacon, and, more critically, vital medical supplies like quinine and bandages. His reasons were always vague, his demands for compliance with obscure regulations ever increasing. A knot of unease tightened in Eliza's chest. The scarcity in their own camp, which Kills Crow had attributed to the long winter and slow thaw affecting the buffalo herds, now seemed possibly linked to a more sinister human design. The environmental challenges of scarce game and a delayed growing season for their small, cultivated patches were being compounded by this unseen man's power. The tension in the camp was a low hum beneath the surface of daily life, a shared worry about depleting supplies before the summer hunts could replenish them. The threat became more immediate, more personal, when a young hunter named Swift Fox, one of the camp's best providers, was brought in on a makeshift travois, his face contorted in agony. His thigh was grotesquely swollen around a ragged, oozing wound, the vicious bite of a rusted animal trap, its jagged teeth clearly meant for beaver but carelessly left on lands the Cheyenne still considered their prime hunting grounds. A settler's trap. The camp's healers, including the respected elder medicine man Stone Bear, a man whose quiet authority was palpable, applied their traditional poultices of chewed willow bark and healing clay, chanting sacred songs to ward off the bad spirits they believed caused such swift and terrible infections. But the wound worsened rapidly in the damp, muddy conditions of early spring. A dark, angry network of veins spread beneath the taut skin, and the sickly sweet smell of corruption began to cling to the air around Swift Fox's lodge. Eliza, her heart heavy with foreboding, recognized the signs from her grandmother's journal, a detailed section, complete with stark illustrations on treating battlefield wounds that often turned gangrenous. The descriptions of discoloration, odor, and rapid decline were chillingly accurate. Hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction born of desperation for the young man's life, she approached Stone Bear, with Hawkwoman acting as interpreter, her voice careful and respectful. Showing him the drawings of advanced infection and pointing to the relevant passages on wound cleansing, she proposed a daring and, to Cheyenne practice, alien treatment: careful debridement of the clearly dying flesh, followed by a repeated wash of a specific herbal solution her grandmother had documented for its powerful cleansing and tissue-regenerating properties. Stone Bear, a man of deep wisdom and initially skeptical of this white woman's talking leaves medicine, listened intently, his gaze sharp upon Eliza's face, then upon the journal's pages. He examined the drawings of the herbs in Eliza's journal, his weathered finger tracing their outlines. He recognized some of the plant families, nodding slowly, and then pointed to several local roots and leaves the Cheyenne used for their potent antiseptic qualities, plants that drew out poison and encouraged clean healing, suggesting they could augment Eliza's proposed wash, making it even stronger. A cautious alliance formed over the shared goal of saving Swift Fox's life. The air in the healing tapi grew thick with the combined scents of Cheyenne and European remedies, as Eliza, her hands surprisingly steady, worked alongside Stone Bear. He showed her how to prepare his additions, crushing them with a sacred stone, while she explained, through Hawkwoman, the necessity of removing every trace of infected tissue, no matter how painful for Swift Fox. It was a grim, exhausting task, but Stone Bear's presence lent authority, and Eliza's gentle determination gave the suffering hunter courage. Against the odds, Swift Fox's leg was saved. Though he would walk with a pronounced limp for the rest of his days, he lived, and the aggressive infection was halted before it could claim him. Eliza's status within the tribe ascended further. She was no longer just Snow Woman, the survivor miraculously delivered from the blizzard, but a healer whose knowledge, when respectfully combined with their own, brought powerful results. Chief Kills Crow now actively sought her counsel. Their conversations, often taking place during the quiet evenings by his lodge fire, expanded beyond matters of immediate health affecting his people. Increasingly, he began to speak to her of the complex political challenges they faced: the ever-shrinking buffalo ranges, the broken treaties that were mere pieces of paper to the white officials, the relentless pressure from settlers hungry for land, and the pervasive duplicity of government men like Agent Thorne, whose policies seemed designed to weaken and control them. A deeper trust was forged between them, born of shared purpose, intellectual curiosity, and mutual respect that was slowly, almost imperceptibly, tinged with a warmer, more personal regard. One evening, while searching her journal for a particular drying method for herbs Stone Bear had shown her earlier that day, a pressed prairie wildflower, its blue faded but still recognizable, fell from between the pages. Tucked behind it was a thin, folded sheet of paper, its creases sharp. It was a letter from her estranged elder sister, Harriet, penned months before Eliza had even left her childhood home in Ohio to follow Thomas West. Harriet's familiar spidery script, full of dire warnings about the barbarity of frontier life and sharp disapproval of Eliza's marriage to a man with no prospects, was a stark, unwelcome reminder of the rigid, judgmental world she had left behind. The words stung, painting a picture of societal condemnation that would surely be even harsher for the path she now walked. A white woman living among the Cheyenne, her life inextricably bound with theirs. The letter felt like a voice from a distant, disapproving ghost. The fragile peace of early summer, with its warm days and the scent of prairie roses on the breeze, was shattered by the unwelcome arrival of Agent Marcus Thorne. He rode into the Cheyenne camp not as a liaison seeking understanding, but as a conqueror delivering terms, flanked by two grim-faced, heavily armed men who looked more like hired thugs than government employees. Thorne himself was a portly man, his face florid and sweating above a too-tight collar, despite the pleasant temperature, his eyes small, pale, and cold as a winter river. He disdained the offered courtesy of Kills Crow's lodge for counsel, choosing instead to conduct his parley in the open center of the camp, his voice loud and condescending as he outlined new, impossibly restrictive rules regarding hunting grounds and movement. Rules that would effectively starve them. Veiled threats about significantly reducing their already inadequate land allotment if they failed to comply punctuated his arrogant speech. His gaze swept over Eliza, who stood quietly beside Hawkwoman near Kills Crow, lingering with a mixture of oily curiosity and open contempt. To him, she was an aberration, a white woman who had clearly gone native, a dangerous curiosity. Kills Crow listened with stoic dignity, his face an unreadable mask of granite, his silence a more potent rebuke than any angry outburst. But the tension was a palpable thing, coiling like a diamond-back rattler in the dust of the camp circle. Thorne's thinly veiled ultimatum effectively put a dire countdown on their already strained food supplies. Not long after Thorne's unsettling visit, as the days grew warmer and the nights remained heavy with dampness from unseasonable rains, a new menace crept into the camp. It began as a dry, persistent cough among the children, then spread with alarming speed to the elders, quickly deepening into a hacking, feverish affliction that left its victims weak, their chests rattling, gasping for each precious breath. Eliza, her heart sinking with a familiar dread, recognized the symptoms her grandmother's journal described with chilling accuracy as lung fever. Malnutrition, a direct and undeniable consequence of Thorne's cruelly withheld rations, had weakened their collective resistance, making them tragically vulnerable. The tribe's usual herbal remedies for coughs and fevers, willow bark tea, infusions of potent prairie herbs, provided some temporary relief, easing the harshness of the coughs and cooling the burning fevers for a few hours, but they weren't stopping its relentless, deadly spread. A quiet panic began to fray the edges of the community's hard-won resilience. Eliza pored over her grandmother's journal day and night, the familiar script a lifeline in a sea of fear and coughing. She found detailed instructions for a potent steam inhalation using expectorant herbs, and a recipe for a syrup designed to soothe inflamed lungs and promote healing using honey and specific roots. Working tirelessly alongside Hawkwoman and a visibly worried, exhausted Stone Bear, she adapted the remedies. They identified local plants with properties similar to those in the journal: pungent prairie sage, resinous pine needles that release their healing oils in steam, and a specific bitter root. Stone Bear knew for its lung-clearing abilities, one rarely used due to its potency. Eliza, remembering her grandmother's emphasis on cleanliness, showed them how she advocated for isolating the sick as much as possible within their lodges, and for careful burning of the cloths used for sputum, concepts that were not entirely aligned with the communal nature of Cheyenne healing, but which Stone Bear, seeing the mounting death toll and the desperation in Kills Crow's eyes, was willing to consider. In turn, he shared with Eliza the knowledge of a sacred plant, its leaves like silver feathers used by the Cheyenne, not as a direct cure, but to strengthen the spirit of the lungs, to call back the will to breathe. He showed her the ritual preparation and the prayer that accompanied its sparse administration. The air in the sick lodges became thick and heavy with a complex blend of scents, the sharp cleansing aroma of Eliza's steaming concoctions, and the subtle, otherworldly fragrance of Stone Bear's sacred smoke. The sickness, though it claimed several beloved elders whose wisdom was irreplaceable, and a few fragile children whose laughter would echo no more, was eventually contained. The shared grief over their losses was a raw, open wound in the heart of the camp, but it also hardened the tribe's quiet resolve against Thorne, whose actions were now directly and undeniably linked to their suffering. Eliza's tireless nursing, her calm competence in the face of such despair, combined with the blended remedies that had finally turned the tide, solidified her place. She was no longer just Snow Woman or Nesse Mape. She was now truly their medicine woman, Hiva Hetanin, woman who does sacred work, her wisdom respected, her presence a source of profound strength and comfort. In the aftermath, as the camp slowly began to heal, Kills Crow's demeanor towards her shifted again, a deeper confidence and a shared burden now evident in his gaze. One evening, as they sat by the fire outside his lodge, the crickets singing their night song, he confided in her the full, alarming extent of Thorne's insidious land grab attempts. He unrolled a magnificent yet worn painted buffalo hide, a sacred map, a hopaho passed down through generations of chiefs, depicting their true ancestral lands, a vibrant tapestry of rivers, sacred mountains, and ancient hunting grounds. With a grim finger, Kills Crow traced the boundaries Thorne was attempting to invalidate with fraudulent documents, twisted legalisms, and false claims of Cheyenne abandonment. The intricate symbols on the hide, a red hawk denoting a vision quest site, a blue winding line for the Powder River, A circle of teepees for an ancient village glowed in the firelight, a testament to a living legacy Thorne sought to brutally erase. The fight was becoming more than just about survival. It was about preserving their very identity, their connection to the earth that cradled their ancestors. And Eliza, looking from the vibrant map to Killscrow's determined, fire-lit face, knew herself to be inextricably part of it. The romantic undercurrent that had simmered beneath their respectful interactions began to gain a quiet strength, a silent acknowledgement of a bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity, mutual healing, and a fiercely common enemy. A few days later, while consulting her grandmother's journal for an unrelated matter concerning a difficult pregnancy in the camp, a pressed flower, its petals the color of a fading bruise, fell out from a section detailing plants found in the Western Territories near the Black Hills. Tucked behind it, almost invisible against the yellowed page, was a tiny, faded annotation in her grandmother's distinctive, spidery hand. Met MT, surveyor with land office near Pahasapa. Suspect dealings, arrogant man. Warned my friend among the Lakota. Eliza's blood ran cold, the journal suddenly heavy in her hands. MT. Marcus Thorne? Pahasapa. The Black Hills, sacred to many tribes, including the Cheyenne. Her grandmother had encountered him, or someone very like him, decades ago. Eliza wasted no time. She took the journal, the pressed flower still marking the page, directly to Killscrow's lodge. Hawkwoman was there, and Stone Bear had come to discuss the dwindling medicinal herb supplies. With a trembling finger, Eliza pointed to the annotation, her voice low as she translated her grandmother's words. A stunned silence fell over the lodge. Killscrow leaned closer, his dark eyes fixed on the faint script, then on Eliza's pale, earnest face. He recognized the description of Pahasapa, a place Thorne was now actively trying to annex with a fraudulent document claiming the Cheyenne had abandoned all claim to it generations ago. Her grandmother's journal also described a unique, eagle-shaped rock formation near where she had met this MT, a landmark Killscrow knew well from his youth, a place his own grandfather had spoken of in winter tales. The information was old, the connection perhaps tenuous, but Thorne's treaty ratification, which would legitimize his theft, was rumored to be imminent. They realized with a chilling certainty that Thorne's corruption was not a recent blight, but a long-standing pattern of deceit. The journal entry, vague as it was, combined with Cheyenne oral history that spoke of a deceitful, smooth-tongued surveyor from that very era, began to paint a clearer, more damning picture. Killscrow, after a long silence spent staring into the fire, a muscle working in his jaw, devised a daring plan. They would not attempt to appeal to the Indian Bureau, an institution they knew to be riddled with Thorne's cronies. Instead, they would use this converging evidence to challenge Thorne before a high-ranking, by-the-book military inspector, a Colonel Davies who was known for his rigid adherence to rules and his intolerance for corruption, and who was, by fortunate chance, due to pass through the territory on an inspection tour within the moon. Guided by the landmark description in Eliza's journal and Killscrow's intimate knowledge of the land, a small, trusted party was assembled. It included Killscrow, a few seasoned warriors, Stone Bear for his wisdom of the old trails, and Eliza herself. Her presence was vital, the journal was her legacy, its secrets hers to share. They traveled swiftly and discreetly towards the Black Hills periphery, the air thick with unspoken tension and a fragile, burgeoning hope. After 2 days of hard riding and careful searching in the area her grandmother had described, near the eagle-shaped rock, one of the warriors gave a low cry. Almost buried beneath seasons of fallen pine needles and encroaching scrub, they found them, old lichen-covered stone markers, their carvings faint but distinct, the original survey markers known to the Cheyenne from their grandfather's time. These markers delineated the true agreed-upon boundary, a boundary Thorne's new, fraudulent maps conveniently ignored, shifting it miles to their disadvantage. They had found their proof, a silent stone testament to Thorne's long-standing treachery, unearthed by a dead woman's nearly forgotten words and a living chief's unwavering resolve. Eliza watched Killscrow trace the ancient carvings on the stone, his touch almost reverent, and a powerful sense of connection to him, to his people, and to her own grandmother's unexpected role in this unfolding drama, washed over her. The confrontation, when it came, was in the stark, windswept parade ground of Fort Laramie. Colonel Davies, a stern, silver-haired man with eyes that missed nothing, presided over a hastily convened council. Agent Marcus Thorne, oozing a false, blustering confidence, presented his meticulously drawn maps and his specious arguments for the land reallocation, citing progress and the Cheyennes' supposed failure to cultivate the disputed territory. Then Kills Crow, his voice calm and resonant, stepped forward. Eliza stood quietly but visibly a little behind him and to his side, her presence as a white medicine woman of the Cheyenne, a source of considerable intrigue and discomfort to Thorne and the assembled fort officers. Kills Crow made his case, presenting not only the Cheyenne oral history and their own understanding of the treaties, but also describing the rediscovery of the original survey markers. He then, with deliberate weight, alluded to an old journal, kept by a white woman traveler decades prior, which had first documented the suspicious nature and initials of a surveyor whose description and area of operation matched Thorne's early career. He did not need to brandish Eliza's journal itself. The carefully planted seed of doubt, the convergence of oral tradition and physical evidence, was potent. Thorne erupted in blustery denials and accusations, his face turning a deeper shade of purple. He decried the savage superstitions and the fanciful claims of a woman addled by living with Indians. But the calm, factual consistency of Kills Crow's account, the undeniable physical evidence of the older boundary markers, rubbings of which Kills Crow presented, and Eliza's quiet, dignified corroboration about the type of historical record her grandmother had kept regarding deceitful individuals in positions of authority, gave Colonel Davies significant pause. He was a man of military law and procedure, and the irregularities Thorne could not explain away, coupled with the agent's increasingly unhinged demeanor, were telling. Davies, his face grim, announced a full and immediate investigation into Agent Thorne's administration of the Cheyenne Agency and all related land treaties. Thorne's authority, so absolute just moments before, visibly crumbled, his reign of petty tyranny clearly at an end. With Thorne's power broken and his removal from office imminent, a wave of quiet, profound relief swept through the Cheyenne camp upon Kills Crow's and Eliza's return. The immediate threat to their lands was diminished, their spirit renewed. That evening, as the moon cast a silver path across the prairie, Kills Crow spoke with Eliza alone by the softly flowing creek. He asked her, his voice deep and earnest, to formally join his people, not merely as an honored guest or their revered medicine woman, but as his wife, to stand beside him, to help him lead and protect their shared future. He acknowledged the vast differences in their origins, the chasm between their two worlds, but stressed the unbreakable bond forged through shared trials, mutual respect, and a love that had grown as strong and resilient as the ancient cottonwoods along the water. Eliza, looking at her healthy, thriving daughter, Little Snowflower, who was already babbling in a mixture of English and Cheyenne, at the community that had saved them and accepted them, and into the eyes of the chief who had become her truest partner in survival, in healing, and in heart, made her irreversible choice. She accepted, her voice sure and clear in the soft moonlight. She chose to weave her life, her daughter's life, and her unique knowledge into the vibrant, enduring fabric of the Cheyenne Nation, accepting their ways as her own while still cherishing the legacy of her grandmother's wisdom. Under the vast Dakota sky, the community honored their union not with loud fanfare, but with quiet blessings, shared food, and heartfelt songs that spoke of resilience and new beginnings. Eliza and Kills Crow, with Little Snowflower held securely between them, looked out upon the land they had fought to protect. They spoke not of easy futures, for they knew such things were an illusion, but of resilient ones, and of teaching their child the strengths and beauties of both her heritages. Years later, Little Snowflower, now a respected young woman known among the people as Cedar Woman Who Remembers, for her steadfast memory and the strength she drew from both her mother's lineage and her Cheyenne upbringing, walked with grace and wisdom in two worlds. She was a skilled healer, trained by her mother from the precious Deerskin Rebound Journal, its pages now interleaved with pressed prairie flowers and notes in Cheyenne script, and by the Cheyenne elders, including an aging but still sharp stone bear, in their ancient botanical and spiritual arts. Her touch was gentle, her diagnoses shrewd, her remedies a potent blend of two powerful traditions. The Cheyenne, under Kills Crow's continued wise leadership, had integrated some of Eliza's documented knowledge improved sanitation practices around birthing that saved many mothers and infants, certain antiseptic preparations for wounds that lessened suffering, and even some of her grandmother's surprisingly effective remedies for common childhood illnesses. This, combined with their own profound understanding of the plains and its resources, had strengthened their resilience against the new challenges that inevitably arose as the white world continued its relentless expansion. Eliza's original journal, alongside Kills Crow's painted hide map of ancestral lands and other significant tribal artifacts, were kept safe within the chief's lodge, becoming treasured teaching tools that narrated their shared history of survival, resistance, and the remarkable synergy of cultural blending. While the pressures from the outside world never fully ceased, Kills Crow's leadership, fortified by Eliza's unique insights and the precedent set by Thorne's exposure and subsequent disgrace, had helped secure a period of relative stability and more just dealings for their specific band. Their children, and eventually their grandchildren, became advocates for their people, walking a difficult but vital path between cultures, their voices carrying the weight of two worlds, their actions guided by a blended wisdom. The epilogue closes on a crisp autumn evening. Cedar Woman who remembers, her face serene in the flickering firelight of a birthing lodge, successfully guides a difficult birth during an unseasonable cold snap. Her hands move with the practiced confidence of her mother. Her low, calming voice murmurs a Cheyenne birthing song learned from Hawkwoman. The air is thick with the mingled scents of sacred herbs smoldering on the coals, as taught by Stone Bear, and a steaming infusion of raspberry leaf and cramp bark, a remedy straight from her grandmother's European traditions, noted carefully in the precious journal. The healthy cry of a newborn cuts through the stillness, a vibrant testament to a legacy of blended survival techniques, preserved cultural artifacts, and ongoing stewardship of life itself. A legacy her parents had forged in the heart of a blizzard, bound by courage, wisdom, and an enduring love.